The sleek silver shuttle descended through the thick, swirling clouds of Zintheron Prime, the heart of the Zintherian Empire. Commander Ethan Vance gazed out the window as the planet's surface came into view. Towering spires that shimmered like glass pierced the sky, their surfaces reflecting the pale blue light of twin suns. Streets filled with enormous, muscular Zintherians stretched as far as the eye could see. Even from the air, their size was intimidating. Ethan adjusted his Navy uniform, his reflection catching in the polished metal walls of the cabin. At 5'10", he was considered average among humans, but here on Zintheron Prime, he'd be little more than a child next to the giants who called this place home. The voice of the shuttle's pilot crackled through the speakers. "We're landing, Commander Vance. Good luck out there." Ethan smiled faintly. He knew the pilot wasn't just referring to the summit. He was stepping into a world where humanity was seen as weak, small, and unworthy of notice. But that's why he was here, to prove Earth's worth to the interstellar community. The shuttle touched down with a gentle hiss, and the doors slid open. Ethan stepped out into the blazing sunlight, blinking as his eyes adjusted. The landing pad was bustling with activity. Zintherians, some nearly twice his height, marched back and forth with military precision, their bronze armor gleaming. Their muscular frames and sharp features made them look like living statues. A group of Zintherian officials approached. Leading them was High Commander Talera Vey, a figure who radiated both authority and power. Her skin shimmered with a faint silver hue, a characteristic of the Zintherian elite. Her emerald green eyes locked onto Ethan as she stopped before him, towering over him by at least 3 feet. "So," she said, her voice a rich, deep timbre that echoed across the landing pad, "this is the human representative." Ethan tilted his head up to meet her gaze, refusing to let her size intimidate him. "Commander Ethan Vance, at your service," he said with a polite smile, extending his hand. Talera glanced at his hand but didn't take it. Instead, she crossed her arms, the gesture making her already imposing figure seem even larger. "You're smaller than I expected," she said, her tone laced with amusement. A few of the Zintherian officials behind her chuckled. Ethan lowered his hand, unbothered by the remark. "We humans may be small, High Commander, but we've learned that size isn't everything." Talera's lips curled into a smirk. "Is that so? Well, we'll see if your actions match your words. Come, the summit is about to begin." She turned sharply, her silver cape flowing behind her as she led the way. Ethan followed, his boots clicking against the polished floor of the landing pad. As they entered the grand hall, he couldn't help but marvel at the architecture. The ceiling stretched so high it seemed to vanish into the heavens, supported by massive pillars carved with intricate designs. Delegates from various species filled the room, their voices blending into a hum of conversation. Most were larger than humans, but none matched the sheer size and presence of the Zintherians. Ethan spotted representatives from the Kyler Consortium, their crystalline forms refracting light like living prisms, and the Ursidians, massive bear-like beings who rumbled as they spoke. As Ethan took his assigned seat at the circular table, he noticed the subtle glances and whispers directed his way. The human representative was clearly a curiosity. Talera sat across from him, her gaze sharp and appraising. The summit began with discussions about trade routes, defense agreements, and resource sharing. Ethan listened intently, noting the dynamics between the species. The Zintherians dominated the conversation, their commanding presence overshadowing the others. When it was finally Ethan's turn to speak, he stood, feeling the weight of countless eyes on him. "Esteemed delegates," he began, his voice steady, "I am here on behalf of Earth to propose a mutual alliance. Humanity may be new to the galactic stage, but we bring innovation, adaptability, and the will to stand united with our fellow species." Talera leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "And what, exactly, does humanity offer that we cannot achieve ourselves?" she asked, her tone cool. Ethan met her gaze. "Perspective," he said simply. Earth has faced countless challenges: wars, natural disasters, near extinction. And yet, we've endured. Our strength lies not in our size, but in our ability to overcome adversity, to think outside the box, and to adapt to any situation. A murmur rippled through the room. Some delegates seemed intrigued, while others remained skeptical. Talera raised an eyebrow. Bold words for someone so diminutive, she said, a teasing edge to her voice. Ethan smiled, unfazed. Size isn't everything, High Commander. Sometimes, it's the smallest flame that burns the brightest. For a moment, Talera said nothing. Then, a faint smirk tugged at the corner of her lips. We'll see, human. We'll see. As the summit continued, Ethan knew he had a long way to go to earn their respect. But he wasn't here to impress them with strength or size. He was here to prove that humanity had a place among the stars, and he wasn't about to back down. The grand summit hall hummed with activity as the delegates broke for a recess. Discussions about trade and defense had taken up most of the morning, but the tension was far from over. Commander Ethan Vance had held his ground well so far, but he could feel the skeptical eyes of the Zintharians following him wherever he moved. High Commander Talera Vey stood near the towering pillars at the edge of the hall, speaking to her fellow Zintharians. Ethan could tell she was watching him, even when her back was turned. Her sharp posture and occasional glances in his direction gave her away. As Ethan walked toward the buffet table, he heard the sharp clang of an alarm reverberate through the hall. The delegates froze, their conversations cutting off abruptly. A robotic voice boomed from the speakers above. Alert! Unauthorized breach detected. All delegates remain in place. Before anyone could react, a section of the ceiling shattered, raining down debris. A group of armored figures descended from hovercrafts, their weapons glowing ominously. They moved with military precision, spreading across the hall and surrounding the delegates. Everyone stay where you are, barked their leader, a tall, cloaked figure whose voice was amplified by a translator device. The Galactic Alliance is a failure, and today it ends. Surrender now, or face annihilation. The rogue faction soldiers raised their weapons, their glowing barrels aimed at the delegates. The room erupted into chaos as some species ducked for cover, while others tried to negotiate. Ethan's hand instinctively went to the small communicator clipped to his belt. His mind raced as he assessed the situation. The rogue faction clearly wanted to disrupt the summit and destroy any hope of unity between the species. But their biggest mistake, underestimating the humans. Talera stepped forward, her towering figure imposing even among the chaos. You dare attack the Zintharian Empire on our own soil, she snarled, her voice dripping with fury. The rogue leader laughed. Zintharians may be strong, but even your kind can fall. Stand down, or your precious delegates will pay the price. Talera's fists clenched, her sharp emerald eyes flicking to the hostages. Ethan noticed her calculating expression. She was torn between fighting and protecting the innocent lives in the room. Ethan stepped closer to her, keeping his voice low. High Commander, we need to work together on this. I have an idea. Talera's gaze snapped to him, her lips curling into a skeptical frown. You? What could you possibly do against them, human? Ethan smirked. Trust me, it's not always about brute strength. Before she could argue, Ethan activated his communicator, sending a silent distress signal to his shovel's eye. The response came almost instantly. The ship was ready to assist. Meanwhile, Ethan surveyed the hall, noting the positions of the rogue soldiers and the hostages. He leaned closer to Talera. We need a distraction. Something big enough to draw their attention while I disable their hovercrafts. Can you handle that? Talera raised an eyebrow, her pride clearly stung by the suggestion. A distraction. I could crush them all myself. Maybe, Ethan replied calmly, but they'll start shooting before you can. If we do this my way, no one gets hurt. Are you in or not? Talera hesitated for a moment, then gave a curt nod. Fine. But if you fail, human, don't expect me to save you. Ethan grinned. Noted. With a quick nod, Talera stepped forward, raising her arms dramatically. "You think you can take on the might of the Zintharian Empire?" she bellowed, her voice echoing across the hall. The rogue soldiers turned toward her, their weapons trained on her massive frame. "Take her down," their leader shouted. Talera charged forward, her heavy footsteps shaking the ground. She moved with incredible speed for someone her size, drawing the soldiers' fire as they tried to subdue her. Ethan seized the opportunity, slipping away unnoticed. He darted toward the rogue faction's hovercrafts, which were still hovering near the shattered ceiling. Pulling a small device from his pocket, he activated a magnetic pulse, disrupting the craft's systems. One by one, the vehicles sputtered and crashed to the ground, cutting off the soldiers' escape route. Meanwhile, Talera fought like a force of nature. Her powerful strikes sent the rogue soldiers sprawling, their weapons clattering uselessly to the floor. Despite her size, she moved with calculated precision, avoiding unnecessary casualties. Ethan rejoined her just as the last hovercraft hit the ground. "The vehicles are down," he said, slightly out of breath. "They're trapped." Talera glanced at him, her expression a mix of surprise and begrudging respect. Not bad, human, for someone so small. Before Ethan could respond, the sound of heavy boots filled the hall. Zintharian reinforcements stormed in, their weapons aimed at the rogue soldiers. Within moments, the attackers were subdued and taken into custody. As the chaos settled, the delegates began to regroup. Ethan stood next to Talera, who looked down at him with a curious expression. "You're full of surprises, human," she said, her tone almost teasing. "Perhaps there's more to your kind than I thought." Ethan shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Told you, size isn't everything." Talera chuckled softly, a sound that almost seemed out of place for someone as fierce as her. "We'll see, Ethan Vance. We'll see." The summit would continue, but something had shifted. For the first time, the Zintharians, and perhaps the rest of the galaxy, had seen the potential of humanity. The summit resumed after the rogue faction had been taken into custody, but the atmosphere in the hall had changed. Delegates now looked at Ethan Vance with more than just curiosity. They looked at him with a hint of respect. Even the Zintharians, so proud of their physical might, were beginning to take notice of the human diplomat's actions. High Commander Talera Vey, who had once dismissed him as too small to make a difference, now eyed him with a mix of intrigue and skepticism. The teasing smirk had not left her face, but there was something different in her expression, something that suggested she was beginning to reconsider her earlier assumptions about humans. After the attack, a brief silence lingered over the proceedings. It wasn't long before Talera made her move. "We need to test your species' abilities," she said suddenly, her deep voice drawing the attention of everyone in the room. Ethan looked up from a quiet conversation with another delegate. "Test our abilities?" he asked, his brow furrowing. Talera's smirk deepened. "Yes. Strength, resilience, resourcefulness. It's one thing to survive a few attacks, but can humans truly stand up to the trials of the galaxy? Can you stand against the Zintharian way?" A murmur ran through the room. The Zintharians had long prided themselves on their physical dominance, and Talera's challenge was a clear attempt to show the strength of her species in comparison to the weak humans. Ethan stood up, meeting Talera's gaze. "I'm ready. What's the challenge?" Talera's eyes sparkled with amusement. "The Trials of Zintharon," she announced. "A series of tests that will measure your endurance, strength, and mental agility. If you can survive them, I will acknowledge that humans have more to offer than just their small size." The room went silent, all eyes on Ethan. Even the Zintharian delegates leaned forward in interest. "Fine," Ethan said, his voice steady. "Let's do it." Without further ceremony, Talera motioned for him to follow. The two of them moved to a large open arena just outside the summit hall. The ground was hard and uneven, with rocks scattered across the field. There were no weapons, only a series of obstacles designed to test the body and mind. "We begin with the first trial," Talera said, her voice filled with authority. You will face the wall of strength, a 50-foot climb. Do you think you're strong enough to reach the top? Ethan didn't hesitate. He was quick on his feet and agile, and he wasn't going to back down now. The Zintharians could underestimate him all they wanted, but he would prove that human determination was just as powerful as their strength. He approached the massive stone wall, his eyes scanning the surface. The surface was slick in places, and there were few handholds. It would be a tough climb, but Ethan could tell that it was more about strategy than brute force. With a deep breath, he leaped forward and grabbed the first ledge. His fingers gripped the rough stone, and his muscles strained as he pulled himself up. It wasn't easy. Each movement was deliberate, calculated, but he was in his element. Talera watched from below, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. She had seen many try and fail at the wall of strength, but there was something about Ethan's calm determination that caught her attention. As Ethan neared the top, a roar from the crowd echoed in the distance. Some of the Zintharians were already beginning to talk, wondering how much longer the human could last. He won't make it, one muttered. No human has ever conquered the wall of strength. But Ethan's focus remained fixed on the top. With one final push, he grabbed the top ledge and pulled himself over the edge. He stood there for a moment, panting but triumphant, before turning to face the crowd. Talera, though she remained silent, couldn't hide the flicker of respect in her eyes. "You're stronger than I thought," she said quietly, her voice no longer mocking. "But this is only the first trial. The next will be more difficult." Ethan gave her a confident smile. "Bring it on." The next trial was a test of endurance. It involved a series of intense physical challenges designed to push the body to its limits. Participants had to race across a battlefield, carrying heavy weights, climbing obstacles, and dodging laser fire from automated defense systems. It was designed to break even the most powerful of warriors, and it would be a true test of his stamina. As Ethan prepared for the challenge, he noticed that Talera was no longer dismissing him. There was no longer any amusement in her expression, only something that resembled curiosity. The giant Zintharian commander was watching him as though seeing him for the first time. The race began. Ethan surged forward, ignoring the weight pressing down on his shoulders as he carried the load across the battlefield. The laser fire shot past him, narrowly missing as he darted between obstacles. It was exhausting, but he refused to slow down. With each hurdle he overcame, he felt his confidence growing. He wasn't just a human, he was a survivor, and this was a test he would pass. By the time he crossed the finish line, gasping for air, the other delegates were in stunned silence. Talera stood there, her eyes narrowed, a trace of admiration hidden beneath her tough exterior. "Well done, human," she said, her voice calm but genuine. "I see now why you insist that size isn't everything." Ethan didn't reply. He was too exhausted to speak, but inside he knew he had earned her respect, and that was just the beginning. With the second trial completed, the third loomed ahead, a mental challenge. Talera had made it clear that strength of body was not enough. Only those who could conquer both mind and body could truly claim their place among the stars. But Ethan was ready for whatever came next. The crowd had grown quiet as Ethan stood, catching his breath after completing the second trial. His muscles were sore and his body ached, but he wasn't about to stop. He had come this far, and there was no turning back now. Talera Vey, High Commander of the Zintharians, looked down at him from across the arena, her arms crossed and her expression as unreadable as ever. After 2 trials, one of physical strength and the other of endurance, Ethan had passed, but he knew she wasn't satisfied. The Zintharians were a proud species, and they demanded more than just brute force. "You've done well so far, human," Talera said, her deep voice carrying across the arena. "But the third trial is not one of strength. It is a test of the mind." Ethan straightened up, his eyes meeting hers. "I'm ready." The arena began to shift. the ground beneath him shifting and reshaping itself into a massive, intricate maze. The walls seemed to rise up from nowhere, towering and twisting in every direction, creating a labyrinth of confusion. "This is the Maze of Dilemmas," Talera explained, her voice echoing slightly in the stillness. "Inside this maze, you will face a series of mental puzzles. Some will test your logic, others your ability to think quickly, and most importantly, they will test your resolve. There are no shortcuts, no easy paths. The only way through is to solve each challenge." Ethan felt a surge of nervousness, but quickly pushed it down. This was his chance to show the Zintharians that humans weren't just survivors, they were problem solvers. He wasn't intimidated by the size or the complexity of the maze. If anything, the challenge excited him. Without a word, Ethan stepped forward into the maze. The entrance closed behind him with a soft hiss, leaving him in complete darkness for a moment. He paused, his eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through the maze's walls. The path ahead was unclear, but that didn't matter. He would figure it out. The first challenge came quickly. A large stone door blocked his path, and on it, an inscription in an ancient Zintharian script glowed faintly. Ethan didn't speak Zintharian, but he had learned to read a few key phrases during his time on Zintheron Prime. This one, he quickly realized, was a riddle. "What is always ahead of you, but never within reach?" The riddle read. Ethan stood there, thinking. The answer wasn't immediately obvious. He paced back and forth in front of the door, muttering the riddle to himself. He thought about it in terms of time, of distance, and of possibilities. After several moments of silence, the answer came to him. "The future," he said aloud. As soon as the words left his lips, the stone door groaned and slowly began to open, revealing the next path. Ethan's heart raced with excitement. The first challenge had been simple, but he knew it was only the beginning. There would be more to come. He moved forward, now more confident in his ability to navigate the maze. But it didn't take long before the next puzzle appeared. This time, a series of levers and buttons lined the walls of a narrow corridor. In front of him, a large pit stretched across the path, its bottom disappearing into darkness. A holographic message appeared, floating in the air before him. "You must choose the correct combination of levers to cross. Choose incorrectly, and the pit will swallow you whole." Ethan eyed the levers carefully, noting the different symbols next to each one. Each lever represented a different choice, a different consequence. Some of the symbols were familiar, but others seemed foreign, their meanings unknown. He could hear the distant sounds of Talera's voice, but it was drowned out by his focus on the task at hand. The pressure of time weighed on him, but he couldn't rush this decision. One wrong move could mean the end of the trial. He reached for the first lever, pulling it down carefully. Nothing happened. Encouraged, he moved to the second lever, choosing a combination that seemed to make sense. Click. The sound was unmistakable. The pit before him started to shift, and the ground rumbled beneath his feet. Ethan took a step back, bracing himself for the worst, but the path ahead of him cleared. The pit had filled with solid ground, and he was able to cross. A feeling of triumph surged through him, but he knew better than to get complacent. There was still more to come. The maze became more difficult as he progressed. Each puzzle seemed to push him further, testing his patience, his intelligence, and his ability to stay calm under pressure. But Ethan was undeterred. He had come this far, and he would not fail now. The final challenge awaited him at the heart of the maze. A large chamber opened up before him, and in the center was a massive structure, pulsating with energy. A series of glowing symbols danced across the structure's surface, shifting and rearranging themselves in a constant, fluid motion. At the center of the chamber, Talera stood, her arms crossed and her eyes fixed on Ethan. "This is the last test," she said, her voice filled with a quiet intensity. "You must solve the puzzle and unlock the core to prove your worth. Fail, and the maze will reset." Ethan stepped forward, eyes locked on the shifting symbols. He could feel the weight of the Zintharian commander's gaze on him, but he refused to be intimidated. This was it, the final test. He would finish it. The symbols danced before him, forming a complex pattern. He reached out, studying them carefully, mentally calculating each movement, each shift. The puzzle seemed to mock him at first, teasing him with its complexity. But Ethan didn't give up. He took a deep breath, clearing his mind, and began to work through the symbols methodically. It took time, but eventually he found the solution. With a satisfying click, the structure's core opened, revealing a glowing crystal at its center. The chamber hummed with energy, and Ethan's heart raced as he stepped back, realizing he had completed the final challenge. Talara's expression shifted, her lips curling into a smile that was almost imperceptible. "You did it, human," she said. "You passed the trial of the mind." Ethan stood tall, sweat dripping down his face, but he couldn't help the triumphant smile that spread across his lips. "I told you, we may be small, but we're capable of anything." Talara's eyes sparkled with respect. "Perhaps you're right, Commander Vance. Perhaps you are." The echo of Ethan's words hung in the air, his voice filled with quiet pride. The final challenge had been completed, and the Zintharian High Commander Talara had acknowledged his success. Still, there was a new silence in the air, one that was thicker, charged with anticipation. The tests were over, but something told Ethan that this wasn't the end of the road. Not yet. Talara studied him for a moment, her emerald eyes narrowing slightly as if deciding what to say. "You have proven yourself in mind and body, human," she said, her tone even, but there was something different about it. Respect. Maybe, but there was something else in her gaze that Ethan couldn't quite decipher. "I told you," Ethan said, wiping the sweat from his brow as he approached her. "I'm not just a small human. I'm capable. My species is capable." Talara's lips curved into a smile, a rare thing for someone as stoic as her. "You've shown us that, Commander. But there's still one thing left." She paused for a moment, eyes scanning the rest of the delegates who had been watching from the sidelines. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? What's left?" "The final reckoning," Talara replied, her voice now heavy with a seriousness that made the air around them seem to thicken. "The galaxy isn't just about strength of body or mind. It's about surviving when everything else is stacked against you. It's about adaptability and resilience. You may have passed the trials, but there's one last test. A test not of you alone, but of your ability to stand with others. To lead." "Lead?" Ethan asked, confused. "Lead whom?" Before he could get an answer, the ground beneath them trembled, and a loud crack filled the air. Talara's eyes widened just for a second before she snapped into full alert mode. "Get to cover. Now." Ethan didn't need further instruction. He dove behind a nearby pillar as the ground shook once more. From above, an enormous ship descended, its sleek, black frame casting a shadow over the arena. The roar of its engines was deafening, and the air around them grew tense as the vessel came to a stop. Ethan's eyes widened as he realized the ship wasn't friendly. He could see the markings on it, an insignia he recognized, the mark of the rogue faction that had tried to destroy the summit only days ago. "No," he muttered to himself, scrambling to his feet. "They're back." "Stay down," Talara ordered, her voice cold and commanding. She was already moving, rallying her guards. But there were fewer Zintharian soldiers than before, and the rogue faction's forces had clearly come prepared for this very moment. Ethan looked over at the Zintharian High Commander, who was now organizing the defense, her every move sharp and calculated. Despite her towering frame and immense strength, he saw something else in her eyes. A hint of doubt. She didn't have enough troops. And this time, they wouldn't be able to just overpower the enemy. "I'll help," Ethan said firmly, stepping forward. "I'm not going to sit this one out." Talara turned to him, her gaze intense but now tinged with understanding. "You think you can defeat them alone? You've passed the trials, but this is not a test of your strength. This is a test of strategy, of leadership. Are you ready for that? Ethan stood tall, a sense of purpose filling him. I'm ready. We'll need every last one of us if we're going to survive this. You don't have to do this alone. Talera hesitated for only a moment before nodding. All right. The plan is simple. We'll fight them off, but we'll need to disrupt their command ship. If we can disable their communication systems, we can stop their reinforcements from arriving. You lead the way, Commander. We'll follow. Ethan's mind raced as he formulated a plan. This wasn't about strength. It was about using what they had, every advantage, to their benefit. They would need to be quick, decisive, and most of all, adaptable. He turned to the other delegates, who had started to gather behind the Zinthurian soldiers. Listen up, Ethan said loudly, his voice carrying across the arena. The enemy isn't just going to walk in and take control. We can stop them, but we need every one of you to fight. We'll have to work together. Zinthurian, human, and every species in this room. The delegates, still shaken, looked at him in surprise. Ethan could feel the weight of their doubt. Many of them had never seen a human in battle before, let alone leading them. But if there was ever a moment to prove humanity's worth, it was now. Are you with me? Ethan asked, his voice strong. We fight, or we fall, together. A murmur spread through the crowd. Slowly, one by one, the delegates began to nod. The Zinthurian guards stood firm, and even Talera gave him a look of quiet approval. Ethan turned back to face the looming rogue ship. The enemy was preparing to land, but he knew they still had a few moments. He pointed to a large control tower just beyond the arena, barely visible above the chaos. Everyone, we need to get to that control tower. If we can disable their communication, we can stop their backup from arriving. Zinthurian guards, cover us. Everyone else, move quickly and stay together. Don't stray. As the delegates and soldiers moved into position, Ethan's pulse quickened. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight for the future. For the chance to prove that humanity could stand on equal footing with the galaxy's greatest species. Talera stood by his side, her posture unwavering. You've done well so far, human. But now we see if you can lead us to victory. Ethan nodded, his focus sharp. We will. The battle had begun, and it would be won for the history books. The tension in the air was palpable. Ethan's heart raced as he led the charge toward the control tower. The rogue ship had landed, and its soldiers were already disembarking, their armored forms moving quickly and efficiently. The delegates who had once watched him from the sidelines were now following his lead, their faces set with determination. Talera stood by his side, her Zinthurian warriors in position behind them. The Zinthurian soldiers were fierce and well-trained, but they were few. This would be a fight not just of strength, but of strategy. Ethan knew they couldn't afford to lose. The fate of the summit, and possibly the future of the galaxy, rested on their ability to act quickly. Keep moving, Ethan shouted, his voice carrying across the battlefield. We need to reach that control tower before they lock us out. Stay close. The path to the tower wasn't easy. The rogue faction's soldiers had set up barriers, creating choke points to slow them down. Laser fire zipped through the air, the bright streaks lighting up the darkened sky. Ethan's mind raced as he scanned the battlefield. He couldn't afford to hesitate, not now. A Zinthurian soldier dropped beside him, narrowly missing a laser blast. Commander, he shouted, his voice tense. We've got enemies closing in from the left. Ethan didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and fired, the shots hitting their mark with precision. Cover me, he yelled. Talera, lead the charge. I'll clear the left flank. Without waiting for a response, Ethan sprinted forward, dodging blasts and weaving through the chaos. The rogue soldiers were everywhere now, but he wasn't afraid. He had learned to trust his instincts, and they had never let him down. He reached the left flank and began to fire, picking off enemy soldiers with quick, accurate shots. Each movement was calculated, each decision made in an instant. The soldiers on his side were moving in formation, following his lead, and soon the left flank was cleared. "Ethan," Talara's voice called from behind him. "We need to move. The tower is in range." He turned to see Talara leading her soldiers toward the control tower. The remaining rogue soldiers were trying to regroup, but they were disorganized. Their advantage in numbers was starting to slip away. "Let's go," Ethan shouted, and he dashed toward the tower, Talara at his side. The control tower loomed ahead, its imposing structure now within reach. But as they neared the base of the tower, the ground shook violently. A new force arrived, a squadron of heavily armored rogues, their weapons ready for combat. The air around them crackled with tension as they advanced, their sheer numbers overwhelming. Ethan knew that if they didn't act fast, they'd be trapped. "We have to get to the tower now," Ethan shouted, his voice urgent. "Talara, cover the team. I'll disable the security systems." Without waiting for a response, Ethan sprinted ahead, dodging blasts and narrowly avoiding enemy fire. He reached the control panel of the tower, his fingers moving quickly over the buttons. His mind raced as he worked to override the security protocols. The enemy was closing in, but he couldn't afford to rush. The panel beeped as the security system recognized his command, but just as he was about to complete the override, a blast hit the ground next to him, sending him sprawling to the floor. Pain shot through his side, but Ethan gritted his teeth and forced himself to stand. "Not now," he muttered under his breath. Talara's voice came through his comms. "We've got your back, Commander. Get that panel." Ethan didn't need to hear more. He pushed himself to his feet and went back to the control panel, his fingers moving with newfound urgency. The seconds felt like hours, but finally, the panel beeped once more. The tower's security systems were down. "We've got it," Ethan shouted. "Now, let's move." Talara's Zintharian soldiers surged forward, charging at the rogue soldiers with renewed strength. The remaining rogues fought back fiercely, but the tide had turned. The control tower was now in their hands, and the Zintharians had the upper hand. But Ethan knew the fight wasn't over. The rogue faction had many more ships, and this battle was just one part of the larger conflict. They needed to take control of the entire area before reinforcements could arrive. "Keep pushing," Ethan commanded, rallying his troops. "We can't stop now. We've got to take the upper ground before their backup arrives." The Zintharian soldiers advanced with him, clearing the area with expert precision. The rogue forces were starting to falter, their numbers dwindling as they fell back. Ethan's leadership had turned the tide of the battle, and now the enemies who had once seemed unstoppable were retreating. "Commander, the tower systems are back online," a Zintharian soldier reported. "We've gained control." Ethan nodded, breathing heavily. He had led his team to victory, against all odds. The rogue forces had been driven back, and the summit was safe for now. But the victory felt bittersweet. The battle was far from over, and they knew that more challenges lay ahead. But for today, they had won. Talara approached him, her expression unreadable, but there was a glimmer of something in her eyes. Respect, perhaps. "Well done, human," she said quietly. "You led us to victory." Ethan smiled through the exhaustion. "We did it together." Talara nodded, her gaze lingering on him. "Perhaps there is more to your species than I first thought." Ethan's smile grew. "We're just getting started, Talara. Just getting started." As the last of the rogue soldiers retreated, Ethan looked around at his allies, Zintharians, delegates from all corners of the galaxy, and humans, united in a common cause. It had been a hard fight, but it had shown everyone something crucial. Humanity, small and underestimated as they were, could rise to any challenge. And this was only the beginning. The sun began to rise over the battlefield, casting a golden light on the wreckage left by the rogue faction. The air was thick with smoke, but the sounds of victory were unmistakable. Ethan stood at the center of the now quiet arena, surveying the aftermath. His heart still raced from the battle, but there was a sense of calm now, a peace that only came with the knowledge that they had won. The Zintharians had fought fiercely alongside him. They had pushed back the rogue faction's forces, and their control of the summit was now secure. It hadn't been easy, far from it, but they had managed to hold their ground and protect the future of the summit, a future where humans would have a place among the stars. Talara approached him, her expression as stoic as ever, but there was something different in her eyes. Respect, gratitude, and maybe even a hint of admiration. The Zintharian High Commander had seen firsthand what humans were capable of. Ethan hadn't just passed her trials, he had earned her trust. "You did it, Commander," Talara said, her voice calm but full of weight. "Your species did it. We couldn't have done it without you." Ethan nodded, his exhaustion finally starting to catch up with him. "We did it together, Talara. Everyone here fought with everything they had." Talara gave him a rare smile, the first one he had seen from her. "True, but you led them. That makes all the difference." Ethan's eyes glanced over at the other delegates, who were now gathering near the command center. The battle was over, but the work wasn't done. They still needed to secure the summit, rebuild, and prepare for what was to come. "This isn't over yet," Ethan said, his voice firm. "We've won a battle, but the war is far from finished. The rogue faction won't stop here. And there are other threats out there we have to be ready for." Talara's gaze was sharp. "You're right. But for now, we've secured the future of the summit, and that's a victory." Ethan didn't argue. The summit, a meeting place for all species across the galaxy, was more than just a symbol of peace. It was a place where cooperation and unity could thrive. And now, humans had earned their place among the galaxy's greatest civilizations. The trials had proven humanity's worth, not just to the Zintharians, but to everyone watching. As the delegates began to regroup, some approaching Talara and Ethan with expressions of awe and respect, Ethan felt the weight of what had just happened. The summit's future had been saved, but the work ahead was just beginning. The galaxy was vast, and new challenges would arise. But humanity had shown they could stand toe-to-toe with the galaxy's mightiest species and come out on top. "You've earned your place here, Commander," a representative from the Gorlak Empire said, stepping forward to shake Ethan's hand. "Humanity has proven that it belongs in the intergalactic community." Ethan nodded, but his mind was already racing ahead. He could see the future stretching out before him. A future of diplomacy, of exploration, and of collaboration between humanity and the other species in the galaxy. It wouldn't be easy. There would be more battles, more trials. But Ethan had learned something in the arena. Humans might be small in the grand scheme of things, but they were capable of extraordinary things. And when humanity united, there was nothing they couldn't overcome. As the sun rose higher, casting light on the battlefield, the survivors began to rebuild. The Zintharians worked alongside the other species, tending to the wounded, clearing debris, and making plans for the future. The rogue faction had been defeated, but the galaxy was still a dangerous place. There would be more to come. But for now, humanity had proven that they could stand tall. They had earned their place in the stars. Ethan stood with Talara as the others moved around them, making preparations for the next steps. The battle had been hard, but they had won. And this victory was just the beginning. "You did well, Commander," Talara said, her voice quieter now, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "Perhaps this will be the start of something new, a new era for humanity." Ethan looked out at the horizon, the stars still visible even in the bright daylight. The galaxy was vast, and the future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: humans had a place in it, and they would fight to protect that place. "We'll be ready," Ethan said, his voice steady. "We won't stop. Not ever." Talara gave him a solemn nod. "I believe you, Commander." As the delegates gathered around, speaking in low voices, making plans for peace and collaboration. Ethan knew that this was just the beginning of humanity's journey into the stars. The rogue faction might have been defeated, but the real work had only begun. There would be more trials, more challenges. But humanity would face them all, with the same determination, the same resolve that had carried them this far. The galaxy had seen what humans could do. Now they would see what humanity could become. Ethan looked around at the faces of the allies he had fought beside, Zintharians, Korlakians, and many others. They had all seen the strength of humanity today. But Ethan knew that the true strength came not from what they had done, but from what they would do together. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to shape, and humanity would be ready.